Welcome to the History Maps podcast. You look at a map of the world in the late 13th century, and what you see is basically this single massive block of land dominated by one continuous sphere of influence.
Right, the Mongol Empire.
Exactly. It stretches from the edges of Eastern Europe all the way across the Eurasian steppe, deep into the Korean peninsula.
Yeah, it operates as this unstoppable rolling machine. It just absorbs kingdoms, cultures, and dynasties with a speed that completely defies the logistical limitations of that era.
But then, right off the eastern coast of the Asian mainland, there is a moderately sized archipelago, just a chain of mountainous volcanic islands. And that is where the machine completely breaks down.
Yeah, it becomes the absolute limit of their expansion. I mean, it's a firm, unyielding boundary where the largest contiguous land empire in human history meets an insurmountable obstacle.
They try twice, and they fail twice.
Right.
So we are continuing our Japanese history series today with a deep dive into that exact obstacle. We are analyzing the Mongol invasions of Japan, which took place in 1274 and 1281.
And the mission for you, the listener, today is to look completely past the popular legend.
Yeah, we have all heard the story of the kamikaze, right? The divine wind that supposedly swept out of the heavens to save Japan from foreign conquest.
Right, but relying on a meteorological event as the sole explanation, it just obscures the intricate military tactics, the high-stakes geopolitical maneuvering, and, well, the massive logistical failures that actually decided the fate of these campaigns.
Weather definitely played a role.
Oh, absolutely. But it functioned as a final blow to campaigns that were already suffering from severe strategic miscalculations and robust tactical resistance. Attributing the survival of Japan merely to a storm denies the agency of the defenders, you know?
And the systemic flaws of the invaders.
Exactly.
So to build an accurate picture of this, we're pulling from a really diverse stack of sources.
We have accounts from medieval Japanese scrolls, specifically the Hachiman Gujukun.
Which gives this incredibly visceral, ground-level view of the combat.
Right, alongside official Mongol and Korean administrative chronicles. We are also examining a detailed military thesis from the Defense Technical Information Center, which analyzes the campaign strictly through the lens of Sun Tzu's Principles of War.
And to anchor those historical texts in hard science, we are incorporating recent marine archaeological data from the shipwrecks themselves.
Yeah, as well as geological sediment cores from the Japanese coast.
The fundamental tension here makes this subject uniquely compelling. I mean, you have a nearly invincible continental land power attempting to project force across the open ocean.
And they are trying to conquer an isolated island nation heavily defended by an elite professional warrior class.
Right.
The sheer scale of the operations, particularly the second invasion, is entirely unparalleled for the 13th century. We are talking about mobilization efforts that rival modern nation-state conflicts.
Let us establish the geopolitical board first. Because to understand why fleets of thousands of ships crossed the sea in the first place, we must first look at the letters that crossed it.
Yeah, we are in the 1260s. Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, is at the helm of the Mongol Empire.
So what is driving his strategic vision at this specific moment?
Well, by the 1260s, Kublai Khan is engaged in this massive, prolonged, and incredibly costly campaign to conquer the Southern Song dynasty in China.
And this Song dynasty is an economic powerhouse.
Exactly. Conquering them is his primary objective, but they are proving really resilient. Simultaneously, he has successfully subjugated the Korean kingdom, known as Goryeo.
Right.
So he is effectively trying to consolidate all of East Asia under his rule to secure his flanks. He wants to isolate the Southern Song from any potential overseas trade or military alliances.
I see. So in his strategic architecture, the Japanese archipelago is just a natural and necessary addition to his tributary system.
Right. He realizes that to conquer the Song dynasty, he needs his eastern flank completely secured.
He cannot risk an independent Japan supplying his enemies.
Or harboring dissidents, exactly.
So he does not send an army first. He sends a piece of paper.
Yeah, it is 1268. Kublai Khan routes a diplomatic mission through his newly conquered Korean subjects to the Japanese administrative center at Dazaifu.
Which is located on the southern island of Kyushu.
Right. And they bring a letter, and the wording is highly specific. He addresses the letter to the King of Japan, demands that they enter into a tributary relationship, points out that he hopes to avoid the use of arms.
And refers to himself as the master of the universe.
Yes. That phrasing is the standard Mongol diplomatic opening. It functions as an ultimatum presented under the guise of an opportunity for peaceful submission.
They explicitly point to the recent fall of Goryeo as a precedent, right?
Exactly. The implication requires no translation. It basically says, submit voluntarily or face the exact same devastation that Korea had just experienced.
So this letter eventually makes its way to Kamakura, which is the seat of the Japanese military government.
Right.
If you are the Kamakura shogunate, receiving a letter from a power that has conquered half the known world, why do you choose absolute silence? I mean, they do not write back, they do not negotiate.
They just detain the envoys briefly and expel them.
Exactly. So why the silence?
Well, we have to break down the internal political mechanics of Japan at this time to understand that silence. The Kamakura shogunate is a military dictatorship running parallel to the imperial court in Kyoto.
Right, so the emperor reigns in Kyoto, but the shogun rules from Kamakura.
Exactly. And real power within the shogunate rests with the Hojo clan, specifically the young regent, Hojo Tokimune. But, his authority is not absolute.
So he can't just make unilateral decisions.
No, the shogunate's power relies entirely on a highly delicate transactional network of loyalties with regional samurai lords, the Gokunin.
Wait, explain the mechanics of that loyalty to me. What specifically stops Tokimune from just paying a token tribute to the Mongols to save his country from annihilation?
Well, the relationship between the shogunate and the samurai lords is governed by a strict legal framework called the Gosaibai Shikimoku Code. The shogun does not own all the land in Japan. He is essentially a manager of land rights. He guarantees the property rights of these regional lords in exchange for their military service.
I see.
Yeah. And the samurai class prioritizes martial duty, absolute sovereignty over their local domains, and independence. If Hojo Tokimune were to yield to a foreign power, to agree to pay tribute to a self-proclaimed master of the universe, it would legally and culturally delegitimize his government.
So the regional lords would just reject his authority.
Exactly. Furthermore, paying tribute requires raising revenue. That means taxing those provincial landlords.
And nobody likes new taxes.
Especially these landlords. They are already highly sensitive to the economic demands of Kamakura. Demanding money to pay off a foreign threat would almost certainly spark a massive domestic rebellion.
So Tokimune would be overthrown by his own vassals before the Mongols ever arrived.
Precisely. Acknowledging the letter is a trap. It either invites Mongol domination from the outside or total domestic collapse from the inside.
Therefore, silence is a calculated political maneuver designed to maintain internal stability.
Right. But Kublai Khan interprets this silence as insubordination. He continues to send embassies. 1269, 1270, 1271, 1272, 5 major missions across several years.
And the Japanese response?
It remains entirely uniform. They either ignore the envoys entirely, deny them an audience with anyone of rank, or explicitly expel them from the country under threat of violence.
No, so by 1273, Kublai Khan concludes that diplomatic channels are exhausted.
Yeah, he shifts his policy from coercion to active military mobilization.
Hold on, though. The Mongols are fundamentally a horse culture from the Eurasian steppe. How do you just order a military mobilization across an ocean?
It is a huge challenge.
I mean, they do not have a naval tradition. The logistics of building a fleet must have been a nightmare.
Oh, absolutely. They circumvent their own lack of maritime expertise by forcing the burden entirely onto their vassal state. The Goryeo Kingdom of Korea has a long, robust maritime tradition.
Right.
But Goryeo has just endured 3 decades of brutal, devastating war against the Mongols before finally submitting. Now, almost immediately after surrendering, they are coerced into a massive shipbuilding program.
So the Mongols demand the Koreans construct hundreds of seagoing vessels.
And supply the thousands of sailors required to man them.
The quotas imposed on the Korean shipwrights are punishing, aren't they?
They are given impossible deadlines. They are forced to strip their forests for timber and draft their agrarian population into naval service.
It creates a deeply reluctant, exhausted, and resentful auxiliary force.
Exactly. You have a command structure where the Mongol leadership relies on forced Korean labor and conscripted sailors to execute one of the most complex military maneuvers in existence.
A massive amphibious landing.
Right. That structural friction within the invasion force is a critical vulnerability.
And the Japanese are not ignorant of this buildup, are they?
No, not at all. They operate coastal watch networks and receive intelligence from merchants crossing the strait. They know ships are being built on the peninsula.
So in response, Shush Tokimune orders the western provinces of Japan to begin fortifying their coastlines and mustering their regional militias.
Right. Diplomacy has definitively failed. The mobilization of the first invasion fleet reaches completion. We are now in the autumn of 1274.
The fleet set sail from Hapo Bay, near modern-day Busan in South Korea, in late October.
And we're looking at a combined force of around 900 ships carrying up to 40,000 troops.
That includes heavily armored Mongol cavalry, northern Chinese infantry units, and the Korean sailors and auxiliary forces.
Yeah, and the timing of the departure is dictated by the environment. They launch in the 10th lunar month specifically to catch favorable seasonal winds.
To push them across the Korea Strait before the harsh winter weather patterns settle into the region.
Exactly. The crossing itself is perilous. It involves navigating roughly 200 kilometers of treacherous open water characterized by strong, unpredictable currents.
The first tactical objectives are the islands sitting right in the middle of that strait, Tsushima and Iki.
Right, these islands serve as the natural stepping stones from the Korean peninsula to the Japanese main islands.
The initial engagements here in early November are just visceral and absolute.
Yeah, the assaults on Tsushima and Iki are intended as demonstrations of overwhelming, terrifying force. On Tsushima, the local governor is a samurai named Susukakuni.
And when the invasion fleet arrives, he manages to mount a defense with an incredibly small contingent, right? Like approximately 80 mounted warriors.
Barely anyone. He rides out to the beach at Sasura to meet a fleet of 900 ships.
Seriously. Just 80 men against thousands.
Yeah, it is a staggering display of martial commitment, but it is ultimately a delaying action. The samurai attempt to engage the Mongol vanguard as they land on the beaches.
But they are entirely enveloped by sheer numbers.
Right. Susukakuni and his men fight until they are wiped out. The Mongol forces then secure the beachhead and proceed to systematically ravage the island, neutralizing any remaining resistance.
And then the identical pattern repeats just a week later on the neighboring island of Iki.
Exactly. The local commander, Taira Kagetaka, mounts a fierce defense with a few hundred samurai retainers. They engage the landing forces, push back the initial waves, but are eventually forced by attrition to retreat into a small, localized fortification called Hinatsume Castle.
And with no possibility of reinforcements arriving from the mainland in time.
The fortification falls. Kagetaka commits ritual suicide with his family to avoid capture.
And the sources note that the Mongols employ pretty brutal psychological warfare tactics during these island clearing operations.
Very brutal. They allegedly execute civilian populations and string bodies to the sides of their ships.
Just to terrify the mainland defenders.
Exactly. Broadcasting the consequences of resistance, it is a methodical, dark advance across the strait.
So by November 19, this massive fleet sails into Hakata Bay on the northern coast of Kyushu.
Right. This is the main island, the real prize, and the gateway to Dazaifu.
And this is where we see a really fascinating tactical clash. It is the Battle of Bunai.
Yeah, the Battle of Bunai brings into sharp focus a profound difference in military doctrine between the two forces. The Japanese samurai of the Kamakura period are heavily focused on individual martial prowess.
Right.
Their entire method of warfare, heavily influenced by the earlier Genpei War, is based on single combat.
So a samurai would ride forward from the lines, announce his name, his lineage, his past battlefield deeds in a tradition called nanori, and actively seek out a worthy opponent from the enemy ranks for a one-on-one duel.
Exactly.
I picture this moment like two teams showing up to a massive arena fully dressed and ready to play, but they're playing completely different sports.
That is a great way to look at it.
I mean, the samurai show up expecting a tennis tournament, right? A series of highly skilled, individualized matches with strict rules of engagement. But the Mongols show up playing a brutal game of rugby. They operate as a single, massive, coordinated unit. In a tennis match, if you lose, it's just you. In a rugby scrum, if the line breaks, the whole team gets trampled. The samurai were fighting a series of one-on-one matches, while the Mongols were running an industrial meat grinder.
That perfectly encapsulates the initial shock of the engagement. When a Japanese warrior rides out to announce his pedigree and seek a champion, the Mongols do not observe the protocol.
They just shoot at him.
Exactly. They simply respond with a massed, coordinated volley of arrows. The Mongols deployed disciplined infantry phalanxes. They advance and retreat not on individual initiative, but to the synchronized beats of drums and the sounding of gongs.
So they move as a cohesive, interlocking block, completely ignoring the Japanese protocols of honorable warfare.
Right. And the technology the Mongols bring is also fundamentally different. The Japanese are facing composite bows,
And these bows are constructed from layers of horn, wood, and sinew.
which gives them a draw weight, range, and penetrating power that completely exceeds the traditional Japanese longbow, the yumi.
Furthermore, the Mongols coat their arrows in poison.
Yeah, turning even minor flesh wounds into lethal injuries.
But the most terrifying addition to the battlefield is the explosive artillery.
Oh, absolutely. The sources describe the use of tetsuhao, or thunder crash bombs.
Right.
This requires us to understand 13th century gunpowder. It is a deflagrating explosive, meaning it burns incredibly rapidly rather than detonating with high-velocity shock waves like modern high explosives.
So these bombs are ceramic or iron shells packed with this early black powder formula and rudimentary shrapnel.
Exactly. They are launched from ship-mounted catapults or thrown by hand into the Japanese ranks. The sudden concussive noise, the blinding flash of fire, and the resulting cloud of shrapnel cause immense confusion and panic.
Especially against the Japanese horses.
Yes, the horses are completely unaccustomed to the sights and sounds of explosive artillery and frequently buck their riders.
But despite facing this massive tactical and technological disadvantage, the samurai do not break.
No, they do not. They absorb heavy casualties, but their martial conditioning holds.
They rapidly transition from their formal dueling protocols to desperate, highly aggressive, close-quarters melee combat.
Right, and the geography of Hakata Bay plays a critical role in preventing a total rout. The Mongol forces managed to secure a beachhead, but they struggled to push their formations inland toward the administrative center of Dazaifu.
Because the Japanese commanders utilized the coastal terrain to their advantage.
Exactly. The pine forests bordering the beaches, the uneven sandy ground, and small local fortifications served to disrupt the rigid Mongol infantry blocks.
And once the formations are broken, the combat devolves into gritty, bloody hand-to-hand engagements where the samurai's individual swordsmanship becomes highly effective.
Yeah, so by the evening of November 20, the momentum on the battlefield begins to shift.
The Mongols, despite their initial advantages in securing the beaches, halt their advance.
Right. They issue orders to pull their troops back from the shoreline and re-embark onto the ships anchored in the bay.
Wait, why do they retreat when they seem to have the upper hand?
Well, several critical logistical and tactical factors drive this retreat. First is the issue of ammunition. The Mongols utilize massed archery as a primary offensive and defensive tactic.
And after a full day of intense fighting against a heavily armored enemy.
They are running dangerously low on arrows. A Mongol infantry or cavalry force without an adequate supply of arrows loses its primary capability to control the engagement distance.
Makes sense. Second, the Japanese samurai do not operate on a rigid schedule. They do not stop fighting just because the sun goes down.
Exactly. The Japanese excel at irregular night operations. As the Mongols retreat to their ships, the samurai use small, highly agile local boats to row out into the bay under the cover of darkness.
They approach the lumbering Mongol transports undetected.
Right, they board the vessels and engage in chaotic close-quarters combat in the confined spaces of the decks. In these conditions, their swords and polearms are devastatingly effective.
They set rigging on fire, assassinate officers, and then row away into the darkness before the Mongol forces can organize an effective counter-defense.
Yeah, these continuous, unpredictable, harassing attacks prevent the Mongol troops from resting and cause severe psychological strain.
And there is also a major blow to the Mongol command structure during the daylight fighting.
Yes. One of the primary Mongol generals, Lu Fuxang, is severely wounded.
Right, a skilled samurai archer manages to shoot him directly from his horse.
The loss of a key theater commander creates immediate operational paralysis.
So when you combine a disrupted command structure with depleted ammunition, exhausted troops, the terror of continuous night raids, and the realization that Japanese reinforcements are rapidly mobilizing from across the surrounding provinces.
The Mongol leadership is forced to reassess their position. They conclude that they cannot sustain a prolonged land campaign or secure the beachhead indefinitely with their current resources.
They reach what military strategists refer to as their culmination point.
Exactly. This is the precise moment when an attacking force expends so much energy and material that it no longer possesses the combat power to continue its offensive operations.
Recognizing they have culminated, they decide to withdraw the fleet back to the Korean peninsula.
And here's where the weather enters the narrative, but in a way that is fundamentally misunderstood in popular history.
Right, because the Mongols load their surviving troops back onto the ships. They're actively preparing to sail back to Korea.
Then, a severe weather event, a massive storm, strikes the fleet while it is at anchor in the bay.
That sequence of events is crucial.
Very crucial. The storm does not defeat the Mongol landing. The Japanese defenders defeat the landing by forcing a tactical stalemate and exhausting the invaders' resources.
The weather event occurs only after the Mongols are already in a state of operational retreat.
Exactly. And the storm is incredibly brutal. High winds and chaotic, surging seas batter the densely packed fleet in the confined, shallow waters of the bay.
Without room to maneuver, ships crash into each other, shattering their hulls. Hundreds of vessels are driven aground on the rocky shoals, or simply swamp and sink.
Up to 200 ships are destroyed in the bay, and thousands of men drown in the dark.
The remnants of the fleet cut their anchors and limp back to Korea, having lost roughly a third of their total invasion force.
For the Japanese defenders, waking up the next morning to see Hakata Bay cleared of enemy ships, save for the massive debris fields and stranded survivors clinging to the wreckage, it feels like a miraculous, divine deliverance.
They quickly move to execute the stragglers on the beaches and begin to process the magnitude of the event.
Right. But the sudden, violent intervention of the weather masks the reality of the tactical situation. The samurai had actually fought the vanguard of the Mongol Empire to a standstill on the beaches through pure martial attrition.
So the 1274 invasion is officially repulsed. Japan breathes a collective sigh of relief.
But both sides recognize almost immediately that this was merely the opening act.
The transition into the interwar years, the period spanning from 1275 to 1280, is vital to our analysis.
Yeah, this failed invasion acts as a massive, systemic catalyst for military and infrastructural innovation on both sides of the sea.
The Kamakura shogunate recognizes that they just survived a near-death experience.
Right, they understand the geopolitical reality. Kublai Khan does not accept defeat. He will return.
Consequently, Kamakura pivots the entire economic output and military structure of Western Japan toward a singular goal: coastal defense.
And the most visible, enduring symbol of this pivot is the Genko Burui.
This is a massive public works project, the scale of which Japan had rarely seen.
Yeah, the shogunate orders the construction of a continuous defensive stone wall running directly along the coastline of Hakata Bay. We are talking about a fortification stretching roughly 20 kilometers long, standing 2 to 3 meters high.
Just massive. To build this, Kamakura assigned strict quotas to the samurai families, forcing them to supply laborers, stone, and funds based on the size of their land holdings.
And the engineering of the wall is specifically tailored to counter the Mongol amphibious tactics they witnessed in 1274. Well, the face of the wall looking out toward the ocean is sheer vertical stone masonry. This makes it incredibly difficult for an invading force wearing heavy, wet armor to scale directly from the sandy beachhead.
Right.
But the inland side, facing the Japanese defenders, is constructed entirely differently. It is heavily sloped, filled with packed earth, rubble, and sand, creating a gradual ramp.
Oh, that is smart. The physics of that slanted design turn the beach into a nightmare for the invaders.
Exactly. It allows the mounted samurai to ride their horses directly up the inland ramp to the crest of the wall.
From that elevated position, they can fire arrows down onto the exposed beaches and then easily retreat their horses back down the ramp to reload behind solid cover.
It turns the entire 20-kilometer shoreline into a highly controlled, deeply fortified kill zone.
And beyond pouring resources into physical fortifications, the samurai undergo a rapid, intense tactical evolution.
Right. The leadership recognizes that individual Ninori dueling protocols are entirely ineffective against disciplined continental armies utilizing massed infantry formations.
So they systematically begin to train their retainers in coordinated infantry tactics.
They learn to volley fire their arrows as a synchronized group rather than individually seeking targets. They shift from a mindset of individual glory to unit cohesion.
They also actively upgrade their hardware. Let us talk about metallurgy.
Yeah, this is fascinating. The standard samurai sword during the first invasion, the tachi, featured a relatively thin blade designed primarily for deep slicing cuts.
Which was highly effective against the relatively light, flexible armor worn by other Japanese warriors.
Exactly. But the Mongols wear thick, boiled leather armor, often reinforced with iron scales.
And boiled leather has a tough, hardened surface that actively resists the slicing motion of a thin blade, right?
Right, frequently causing the swords to chip or snap upon impact. Recognizing this failure, Japanese swordsmiths began experimenting.
They start forging swords with a thicker spine to absorb impact.
And a modified curvature and much stronger points, optimizing the weapon for thrusting to penetrate that tough leather rather than just slicing.
This specific metallurgical and geometric adaptation is the direct evolutionary step toward what the world now recognizes as the iconic katana.
It is. While the military-industrial complex adapts, the political stance of the shogunate hardens into absolute defiance. Hojo Tokimune adopts an incredibly aggressive, fatalistic posture toward any further diplomatic missions from the continent.
Yeah, in 1275, another Mongol delegation arrives in Japan, carrying letters seeking formal submission.
And Tokimune does not ignore them this time.
No, he has the envoys forcibly brought to the capital in Kamakura, marches them down to the execution grounds on the beach at Tatsunokuchi, and has them publicly beheaded.
And then he repeats this exact same action with yet another diplomatic delegation in 1279.
Executing envoys is a universal, unambiguous declaration of absolute war.
Completely. There is no diplomatic mechanism to walk back from that action. It is a highly calculated, deeply provocative message sent directly to Kublai Khan. We will never submit, and we are daring you to return.
And that message of defiance reaches Kublai Khan precisely as the geopolitical landscape on the Asian continent experiences a massive structural shift.
Right. In 1279, after decades of brutal attrition, the Mongol forces finally defeat the last remnants of the Southern Song dynasty at the massive naval battle of Yamen.
The implications of that victory are staggering.
They really are. For decades, the Mongols were fundamentally a land power, relying on cavalry and infantry. But by conquering the Southern Song, they inherit the vast, sophisticated naval infrastructure of southern China.
They now control massive, deep-water shipyards, thousands of seagoing transport and war vessels, and tens of thousands of highly experienced Chinese sailors, navigators, and marines.
The acquisition of the Song Navy fundamentally alters the scale of force projection Kublai Khan can achieve.
He is no longer limited to the relatively modest resources he can extract from his Korean vassals.
Exactly. He now possesses the industrial and human capital to launch an armada capable of dominating the seas.
So the execution of his envoys provides the fury and the political justification, and the capture of the Song Navy provides the physical means.
Right. This precise combination of rage and naval capacity sets the stage for the second invasion, the Battle of Kun, in 1281.
And this campaign will manifest as the largest amphibious invasion in human history up until the naval landings of the 20th century.
To execute this, Kublai Khan institutes a dual fleet strategy. It is a military operation of unprecedented complexity for the medieval world.
The First Fleet, designated the Eastern Route Army, is mobilized from the Korean peninsula, utilizing the infrastructure established during the first invasion.
This force consists of roughly 40,000 troops, including Mongol, Korean, and northern Chinese soldiers, packed into 900 ships.
And then you have the Southern Route Army, launching from the newly conquered deepwater ports of southern China.
And the numbers here defy comprehension for the era. 100,000 troops, primarily consisting of former Song Chinese soldiers who have been integrated into the Mongol military apparatus, boarding an estimated 3,500 ships.
We are talking about a combined force approaching 140,000 men and nearly 4,500 vessels.
The strategic plan dictates that these two massive fleets, launching from ports hundreds of miles apart, will cross the ocean independently.
Right.
Navigate to a specific rendezvous point at Iki Island off the coast of Japan, merge their command structures into a single, overwhelming armada, and then proceed to crush the Japanese defenses at Hakata Bay through sheer weight of numbers.
Let me stop you right there. I have to push back strongly on the viability of this plan. Attempting to coordinate two massive armadas, launching from completely different countries with different weather patterns, and relying entirely on 13th century communication methods, which essentially means sending a guy in a fast wooden boat across open ocean, seems like an absolute logistical fantasy.
It really does.
If you have ever tried to manage a project with two corporate teams in different time zones, think about Kublai Khan trying to coordinate fleets from China and Korea.
Yeah.
It requires perfect timing, perfectly cooperative weather, and zero internal friction. It is impossible.
Your skepticism cuts directly to the core vulnerability of the campaign. The level of synchronization required for this dual fleet strategy to succeed was virtually impossible, given the technological limitations of maritime communication in the 13th century.
Right.
It was a plan drawn up on a map in a palace, completely divorced from the realities of naval logistics, and almost immediately the execution of the plan begins to violently unravel.
Walk me through the timeline. Where does the friction start?
While the Eastern Fleet, launching from Korea, manages to prepare and provision on schedule, departing the peninsula in late May of 1281,
Okay.
but the massive Southern Fleet in China experiences cascading delays. Provisioning 100,000 men strips the local agricultural surplus, causing massive supply bottlenecks at the docks.
And furthermore, while the fleet is idling in the hot, humid southern ports, a severe epidemic breaks out among the densely packed troops.
Exactly. And critically, their primary operational commander, a highly experienced general named Alaka, suddenly falls ill and dies right before the scheduled departure.
Oh, that is a huge blow.
It is. This sudden loss creates a massive leadership vacuum, stalling the fleet until a replacement commander, Fan Wenhu, can travel to the port and assume control.
So the Eastern Fleet sails as planned. They cross the strait, hit the islands of Tsushima and Iki again, but then they're just sitting there.
Right, they're occupying hostile islands, burning through their finite rations, waiting for a southern fleet that is weeks, possibly a month behind schedule.
Eventually, the Eastern commanders face a crisis.
They decide they cannot just wait on the islands and starve. They make the unilateral decision to push forward and initiate the assault on Hakata Bay on their own in early June 1281.
And when the Eastern Fleet arrives at Hakata Bay, expecting to find the open, accessible beaches they encountered 7 years prior, they face a vastly different and heavily engineered reality.
Yeah, they sail into the bay, drop anchor, prepare to deploy their landing craft, and find themselves staring at the Genchi Burui.
20 kilometers of sheer stone wall, completely cutting off the beach, bristling with thousands of heavily armed, heavily motivated samurai.
The wall absolutely neutralizes the Mongol landing attempts. Every single time the Eastern Fleet tries to deploy shallow draft landing craft to secure a beachhead, they are funneled into these narrow, tightly packed spaces at the base of the wall.
And the samurai, executing their new tactical doctrines and utilizing those sloped inland ramps right up to the crest of the wall.
They rain down highly coordinated, devastating volleys of arrows and then cycle back down to safely reload. The beaches are transformed into impenetrable kill zones.
The Mongols cannot establish a foothold.
The Eastern Fleet is completely stymied by the fortification. Without a secure beachhead, they cannot unload their heavy cavalry or establish supply depots.
They are forced to remain on their ships, anchored in the bay under the sweltering June sun.
Right, they suffer from extreme heat exhaustion, rapidly dwindling fresh water and food supplies, and the rapid, unchecked spread of dysentery and other diseases within the cramped, unsanitary quarters of the vessels.
And the Japanese do not just sit passively behind their stone wall, waiting for the invaders to die of thirst.
No, this stalemate on the water is where the samurai night raids reach their absolute terrifying peak.
Right.
The static positioning of the Mongol fleet allows the Japanese to entirely dictate the tempo of the engagement on the water.
Operating from small, incredibly fast, shallow draft local boats, specialized teams of samurai row out into the dark waters of Hakata Bay and nearby Amari Bay night after night.
Picture the psychological toll of this.
Seriously, imagine being a conscripted Korean sailor or a northern Chinese infantryman on a Mongol transport ship. You are anchored in hostile waters thousands of miles from home. You are sick, you are hungry, and it is pitch black.
And suddenly, a dozen small boats silently glide out of the darkness, slipping right past the sightlines of your sentries.
Before anyone can sound an alarm gong, heavily armored warriors are scrambling up the wooden sides of your ship,
They're hacking through the defenders with Naginata polearms.
which are basically swords on long shafts.
Exactly. And driving those newly forged armor-piercing blades into the crew, they methodically kill the command staff, set the heavy canvas rigging and sails on fire, and then leap back into their small boats.
Vanishing into the night before the surrounding ships can even understand what is happening.
These relentless raids cause immense psychological terror and severe tactical disruption across the anchored fleet.
The crews are exhausted from perpetual vigilance.
So, to defend against these boarding parties, the Mongol commanders make a fateful structural decision. They order the ships in the fleet to be lashed together using heavy iron chains and thick wooden planks.
They essentially interlock the fleet, creating massive, floating wooden fortresses.
Lashing the ships together creates a stable platform. It makes it much harder for a small Japanese boat to isolate and board a single vessel.
But by doing this, they completely eliminate their own mobility.
Exactly. They're tethered together in a massive, inflexible block.
So we have the Eastern Fleet pinned down by the wall, suffering from disease, and chained together in the bay. Finally, in mid-July, the massive Southern Fleet arrives from China.
The two forces merge. We now have nearly 4,000 ships and well over 100,000 men packed into the confined bays and inlets around the Kyushu coast.
The combined armada attempts several coordinated, massive amphibious assaults.
Particularly focusing their efforts around the nearby island of Takashima in an attempt to bypass the main wall at Hakata.
But the Japanese defenses, reinforced by the arrival of regional armies from across the island, hold the line.
We're now moving deep into August. Portions of the Mongol fleet have been deployed on the water for over 2 months.
They are critically low on supplies, racked by disease, and locked in an unbreakable operational stalemate.
This brings us to the climax of the narrative. The immense fleet is pinned on the water. They are unable to take the beaches due to the fortifications, and they are chained together to repel boarders.
This combination of factors leaves them entirely, hopelessly vulnerable to the environment.
Around August 14, 1281, the meteorological reality of the region asserts itself. A massive typhoon sweeps in from the Pacific Ocean.
This is it, the kamikaze, the divine wind.
The storm system slams directly into the exposed bays where the combined Mongol fleet is anchored.
Because the ships are heavily chained and planked together, they completely lack the ability to maneuver.
Right. In a severe storm, a captain must be able to point the bow of the ship directly into the wind and the incoming swells to ride them out.
But the chained Mongol ships cannot turn. They take the massive swells broadside.
The descriptions from the primary sources are apocalyptic. The sheer force of the wind in the ocean simply tears the interlocking fleet apart. The chains act as instruments of destruction.
As one ship is lifted by a swell, it drags the adjacent ship down.
Massive vessels smash into each other, grinding their heavy wooden hulls to splinters in the dark. The immense storm surge drives hundreds of ships onto the rocky shoals and beaches.
Up to 80% of this unprecedented world-conquering invasion force is completely destroyed in a matter of hours. The bays are choked with wreckage and bodies.
And this is not just historical hyperbole written by the victors. We have hard empirical scientific evidence to corroborate the massive scale of this event.
The geological record.
Right. Geologists have taken deep sediment cores from the bottom of nearby Lake Nakami. In those cores, they isolated a very specific, thick layer of marine deposits.
Coarse ocean sand, high strontium levels, and marine microfossils that were driven far inland.
Exactly. Radiocarbon dating places this specific layer perfectly in the late 13th century. This geological record proves the occurrence of a storm surge of massive proportions, far exceeding the intensity of typical seasonal typhoons.
And the marine archaeology adds a fascinating, deeply technical layer to this analysis. Over the last few decades, underwater archaeologists and divers surveying the wrecks at the bottom of Amari Bay have recovered thousands of artifacts.
Yeah, they have found heavy stone anchors, rusted helmets, bundles of arrows, and artillery shells.
But they also found something crucial about the naval architecture, about the construction of the ships themselves.
The archaeological findings reveal a critical logistical failure. The divers discovered that many of the sunken ships belonging to the massive Southern Fleet, the ones hastily constructed in the newly conquered Song shipyards, were fundamentally compromised from the moment they were built.
They found evidence of double-drilled mast steps.
Yes. The mast step is the crucial wooden socket that holds the base of the massive mast. A double-drilled step indicates that the builders were reusing old, compromised timber or moving masts to adjust balance on poorly designed hulls.
Furthermore, many of the wrecks show signs of being flat-bottomed riverboats, hastily retrofitted with sails.
And a flat-bottomed boat has no keel to stabilize it in a deep ocean swell. The urgent, tyrannical demand from Kublai Khan to build thousands of ships in a matter of months resulted in corners being cut and shoddy craftsmanship.
This made the Southern Fleet exceedingly fragile and prone to structural failure when faced with extreme weather.
Exactly.
So we have to ask the critical analytical question here. Was it really just the weather that saved Japan? Does the kamikaze deserve the historical credit it receives?
This is where we must apply rigorous strategic analysis. particularly drawing on the DTIC thesis utilizing Sun Tzu's The Art of War to deconstruct the anatomy of this defeat. If we analyze the Mongol campaign objectively, we see that they systematically violated several core tenets of military strategy. First, and perhaps most fatally, they ignored the concept of terrain.
You mean the shallows of the bays?
Exactly. Sun Tzu emphasizes the critical nature of understanding and exploiting the ground. The Mongols sailed massive, deep-draft transport vessels into the shallow, highly confined waters of Hakata and Imari bays.
Because the water was too shallow near the shore, the large ships had to anchor far out, necessitating a complex, vulnerable ship-to-shore transfer using small landing craft.
Right. They had no room to maneuver the main fleet, allowing the smaller, highly agile Japanese local boats to completely dominate the tactical space during the night raids.
Furthermore, they failed to account for the meteorological terrain.
Organizing a massive naval expedition into the Pacific during the absolute peak of the annual typhoon season without identifying safe harbors or hurricane holes to shelter the fleet is a strategic oversight of catastrophic proportions.
They also failed entirely in the realm of information warfare and intelligence gathering.
Sun Tzu relies heavily on espionage, deception, and knowing the enemy. The Mongols possessed none of these advantages.
Their clumsy diplomatic blunders and the massive, noisy shipbuilding programs in Korea ensured the Japanese knew they were coming years in advance.
They surrendered the element of surprise entirely.
Conversely, the Mongols operated on terrible, outdated intelligence.
The Eastern Fleet sailed into Hakata Bay in 1281, expecting to land on open beaches, completely unaware that the Japanese had spent the last 5 years constructing a 20-kilometer continuous stone fortification. They sailed blindly into a prepared trap.
So if we synthesize all of this, what does this ultimately mean for the narrative of the kamikaze?
It means that the Japanese resistance had already forced the Mongol military machine to a state of tactical culmination before the typhoon ever arrived.
The samurai's massive fortifications, their relentless and terrifying night raids, and their sheer martial tenacity had halted the Mongol advance at the water's edge.
They locked the fleet into a vulnerable, static position. The storm acted as the executioner, but Japanese military preparation built the scaffold upon which the Mongols were hanged.
That is a profound reframing of the history. The invaders are effectively wiped out by the storm.
Yeah, the few surviving senior commanders, including Fan Wenhu, requisition the few remaining seaworthy ships and flee back to China,
Callously abandoning tens of thousands of their own men on the shores of Kyushu.
The aftermath leads to brutal, systematic mop-up operations. The surviving Mongol and Korean troops, stranded on the beaches without leadership, supplies, or hope of rescue, are hunted down and executed by the samurai.
Interestingly, the historical records show that the Japanese spare many of the former Song Chinese soldiers.
Right. The Japanese leadership recognizes them not as willing invaders, but as conquered subjects forced into service by the Mongols. They possess valuable agricultural and artisanal skills.
So they are enslaved and integrated into the local economy rather than slaughtered. So Japan survives. They repel the greatest military power on Earth, a power that conquered from China to Europe. They beat them twice.
You would logically think this massive victory would usher in a golden age of prosperity and unity for the Kamakura shogunate.
But surviving an existential threat comes at a massive, ultimately fatal internal cost.
It introduces a bitter, systemic irony that perfectly illustrates the economics of medieval warfare. In the Japanese feudal system, samurai fight with the strict expectation of material reward.
Right. When they defeat an enemy clan, the shogunate confiscates the defeated clan's lands and wealth and distributes those assets to the victorious samurai to expand their estates.
But because this was a purely defensive war fought entirely on Japanese soil against a foreign invader who brought no wealth with them, there are no conquered lands to distribute.
There is no Mongol treasury to plunder.
The insight here regarding modern and medieval warfare is striking. Winning a purely defensive war is economically identical to losing one.
You expend all your resources and you gain absolutely nothing in return.
The samurai have fought, bled, and died for 7 years. They have entirely bankrupted their own estates, buying armor, feeding horses, and forging weapons for the coastal defense.
They march back to Kamakura and demand their rightful compensation from the shogunate.
And the shogunate has absolutely nothing to give them. The central treasury is drained from building the wall.
Furthermore, because Kublai Khan never officially surrenders, He is enraged by the defeat and actually begins planning a third invasion that is only canceled due to rebellions in his other territories.
The Kamakura shogunate must maintain that state of high military alert.
They forced the already bankrupt samurai to continuously man the coastal defenses in Kyushu without pay and away from their farms for decades, stretching into the early 1300s.
It creates an economic crisis of epic proportions. The younger sons of samurai families inherit nothing.
The financial strain of maintaining a standing military, combined with the deep resentment over unpaid rewards, breeds widespread anger among the warrior class.
The delicate transactional loyalties that held the shogunate together begin to severely fracture. This resentment steadily builds like pressure in a fault line, progressively alienating the powerful provincial lords from the central government.
Ultimately, this profound economic exhaustion and a total loss of faith in Kamakura's ability to reward its vassals directly contribute to the total collapse of the Kamakura shogunate in 1333.
The government that saved Japan from the Mongols is overthrown by the very warriors who fought for it, plunging Japan into a chaotic new era of civil war known as the Nanbokuchu period.
While the physical government collapses under the economic weight of the victory, the narrative of the victory takes on a powerful life of its own.
The religious institutions, the complex network of Buddhist temples and Shinto shrines that had been conducting continuous prayers and rituals for deliverance throughout the invasions, see an opportunity.
They claim full, unequivocal credit for summoning the typhoons.
The religious elite argue that the kami, the indigenous divine spirits of Japan, intervened directly in the physical world to protect the nation.
This theological interpretation permanently cements the Shinkoku ideology, the fundamental belief that Japan is a divine land, uniquely protected by the gods and superior to all other nations.
The legend the kamikaze, the divine wind, is officially born. It evolves into a myth of inherent national invincibility that lodges itself deep into the cultural and political psyche of Japan.
This specific mythos echoes centuries later, heavily influencing military doctrine and propaganda, most notably during the catastrophic events of the Second World War.
It is incredible how the narrative shifts over time. The gritty, highly strategic reality of stone walls, metallurgical adaptations, logistical failures, and terrifying night raids is slowly overwritten by the romanticized, simplified image of a heavenly storm wiping away the enemy.
Understanding the history requires separating the myth from the mechanics.
Acknowledging the military reality does not diminish the magnitude of the event. In fact, it reveals the profound, organized human effort required to resist an empire. The Japanese survived through engineering, tactical adaptation, and sheer endurance.
The storm merely closed the book they had already written.
Right.
We started today looking at a map of a massive, unstoppable imperial machine grinding to a halt against a rocky shore. It leaves you with a final thought to mull over regarding the mechanics of history, the law of unintended consequences.
Yeah.
If Kublai Khan had simply accepted Japan's diplomatic silence, if he had focused his resources purely on the continent and never launched his armadas, the Kamakura shogunate might never have exhausted its treasury and alienated its most vital supporters.
By attempting to forcefully conquer Japan, the Mongols failed completely in their primary objective, but they inadvertently set off a devastating economic and political chain reaction that destroyed the Japanese government from the inside out.
The Mongol machine did not conquer the island, but the sheer crushing weight of defending against it cracked the foundation of Japan forever. Thank you for listening. History Maps. Learn history visually.